Chapter 6. And then there were 6. March 3rd, 2086. The Wolverines insisted on leaving the safe house at daybreak. Inez and Cassandra, sensing they had another long journey ahead, grabbed as much canned food from the kitchen as they could, cramming it into a backpack and taking it with them. Outside, Lawrence piled everyone into his heavy-duty off-road vehicle. There was only space for 5 people in the cab. Lawrence and Sarah were up front, while Inez, Jay, and the woman called Russell were in the back. Little Cassandra ended up sitting in Inez's lap. By this point, Inez knew the 4 Wolverines hated one another to the point of violence. Asking them questions about themselves was risky, but she needed answers, especially from Lawrence. He'd been her neighbor for 2 years. How long had he been part of this outfit? That was the first question she asked. Up in the driver's seat, Lawrence maneuvered the ORV onto the remains of what had once been a highway and started driving north. He answered without looking back. "I've been working for the Bureau for the past 20 years, he said. "But they put me in Wolverine's cell about 5 years ago." "So what was your cell supposed to do?" Inez asked. "I get you are fighting the UN, but it's just the 4 of you. How's that supposed to work?" "The cells were scattered all over the country," Jay explained. "Each one carries out guerrilla operations or supports resistance groups that are already established. It's our job to make life hell for the UN soldiers in our cities and towns. We make this place too difficult, too bloody, and too miserable for them to stay." "We've been fighting the UN for almost 15 years, Sarah continued. "And it really looked like we were going to push the Blueheads into the Atlantic for a while, but then everything changed." "What do you mean? What happened?" Cassandra asked. "Scarlett Freeman," Russell grumbled. "Your mother, Espinosa. That's what happened." Lawrence, Sarah, and Jay all shot Russell dirty looks. Inez felt a little frustrated. She could tell there was animosity between all of the Wolverines, but there seemed to be a particularly intense feeling of hatred from all of them towards Russell. Had she done something? Inez decided to press the topic. "I'm sorry," she began, addressing Russell, "but I know everyone except you now. What do you have to do with any of this?" The Asian woman glared at her 3 companions. "Anyone gonna tell my story for me? Poison her mind against me before I can get a word in? I know you want to," Russell growled. "If it were any other person, I totally would," Lawrence said. "But seeing as it's Espinosa's kid, she'll get the full story soon enough. Talk away." Russell narrowed her eyes at Jay and Sarah, but neither spoke, so she introduced herself to Inez and Cassandra. "My name is Piper Russell. I'm from Ann Arbor, or what's left of it anyway. I was supposed to be a spy for the Bureau." Sarah scoffed and interrupted. "That's bullshit, Nezzy. Russell here is an ISO double agent. She works for your mom." "Don't call me Nezzy," Inez snapped. Then she looked back at Piper. "And really? ISO?" Piper Russell shook her head. "Never. I was spying on the ISO for the Bureau. I was working against your mom. And yet, you got big, fat paychecks from a UN benefactor right before our troops got crushed at Saginaw and Yorktown." Lawrence raised his voice. "You sold us out to Freeman." Piper grabbed her own head in frustration. It looked like she was going to pull her own hair out. "How many times have I told you that's a coincidence?" She almost shouted. "I catfished a UN official. That's how I got the money. He thought he was my freaking sugar daddy." The argument would have continued, but Inez spoke loudly, saying, "Guys, It's getting hot in here! In her lap, Cassandra was warming up again. The little girl squirmed uncomfortably in Inez's lap, her body rapidly becoming way too hot to touch. Everyone fell silent for a moment and rolled down the windows before the temperature got too high. With the argument diffused, Inez muttered, "What difference does it make if she's working for the ISO anyway? When my dad showed up in Novi, he said my mom was dead." This produced an immediate and radical reaction. Lawrence slammed on the brakes, bringing the ORV to a full and complete stop. Sarah and Piper both swore, and Jay yelled, "She's dead? When? Where? How?" Luckily, there were no other cars on the deserted highway. Lawrence put the vehicle in park and looked around to Inez. "I don't know," she said quickly. "All I heard him say was that she was dead." Sarah, Jay, Piper, and Lawrence all gave one another concerned looks. "Honestly, I thought we would have been celebrating this kind of news," Sarah admitted. "I've got a bottle of whiskey I was saving for when Freeman finally croaked," Lawrence said. "But somehow, this all feels off." Inez was stunned. These people must have really hated her mother to have been planning to celebrate her death. To be fair, Scarlett had never taken an interest in raising Inez and had abandoned her in Detroit, so there was no love lost. But Inez could never imagine herself celebrating Scarlett's demise. Piper gave Jay a meaningful look. "Listen to me," she said. "If Freeman really is dead, the ISO is going to move quick to plug the holes. Perhaps we should make Inez come to us instead of going all the way to them." Jay nodded. "I think so. Roberts, break radio silence and ask them to meet us in the middle." "Do you think it's worth the risk?" Sarah asked. "I do," Jay replied. "We might be in bigger trouble than we first thought." Sarah pulled a high-frequency radio from the glove compartment and started to program a channel into it. Before she could finish, though, a voice suddenly projected itself from the speaker. "I see them!" a male voice said. "They're in a brown ORV on the abandoned stretch of I-75, south of Flint." Sarah cursed. "Damn it! The Blueheads found us!" Lawrence slammed the car into gear and pinned the accelerator. Cassandra wailed and started to warm up again, leaving Inez somewhat angry. Was this girl going to turn into a hot iron every time someone upset her? The ORV sped down the freeway while Lawrence looked around for an escape route. "Hey, Nezzy, how do you know Lawrence?" Sarah called from the front. "He said you two have some history together or something." "We hang out sometimes, and don't call me Nezzy," Inez replied. "But he never mentioned his secret life as an action hero." Lawrence rolled down the driver's side window and looked up into the sky. "I'm guessing it's a drone or a satellite that spotted us, maybe even a starship. We've got to get under cover," he said as he pulled the ORV off the highway. "And you know, Nezzy, I never meant to drag you into any of this. I liked our friendship the way it was." "You won't have a friendship if you keep calling me that," Inez snapped. "Also, you won't have a life if you don't shake those guys off." She pointed to the back window. A UN hovercraft was flying above the treetops, following the overgrown trail of rubble that had once been the interstate highway. The hovercraft itself was long and sleek, about 2 stories tall and some 50 yards long. A side hatch was open, and a group of UN soldiers were seated on the edge with rappelling gear in their laps. They were going to carry out an air assault. Lawrence pulled off the freeway and onto a side road. Actually, the term road was too generous. It was a 2-track dirt road overgrown with shrubbery and young trees. The ORV slowed down as Lawrence navigated the wildlife. Meanwhile, the UN hovercraft vanished from sight. "When I give the word," Lawrence told the group, "I need everyone to get out of the car and follow me into the trees, okay?" "What?" Cassandra started to ask, but Lawrence cut her off. "Just do as I do and follow me, understood?" A moment later, Lawrence turned off the battered road entirely. Suddenly, they were in the forest. Big trees were everywhere, a shallow creek bubbled through the undergrowth, and the sky was hidden from view by the canopy. Lawrence drove straight down the riverbank and brought the ORV to a stop in the middle of the river. Waters rose up to the door, but no higher. "Everyone out!" he yelled. "Make for that cave!" Doors opened and slammed shut. Inez didn't stop to think about her feet getting wet. She swept Cassandra into her arms and broke into a jog, following the Wolverines. For about a moment, Inez wondered just how a cave would naturally occur out here in these wet pine forests. Then she had her answer a moment later. Somebody had carved a small hole into the side of a hill between two large trees. If she wasn't looking for it, Inez would have missed it altogether. Lawrence vanished into the pit first, followed by Sarah. Inez hesitated, causing Piper to push her through it. Now that she was inside, Inez found herself very hard-pressed to call this place a cave. It was barely bigger than her apartment bedroom, damp and cold. Once everyone was inside, Piper grabbed a large object off the floor and used it to block the entrance, shutting out most of the light. Then she drew a laser pistol and covered the tiny sliver of light still shining through. "Everyone, be quiet," she hissed. "The Blueheads just found our car. They're right outside." The minutes seemed to crawl by like snails. Inez could hear the voices of UN soldiers outside. They were searching the creek and surrounding forest. In the cave, it wasn't as cold as it could have been. Cassandra was frightened again, which meant she was generating heat. Inez let go of her, and Cassandra hid in the shadows of the far corner. Inez pressed herself into Lawrence's frame, and he wrapped his arms around her. She suddenly remembered how much she missed this kind of intimacy, and embraced Lawrence in kind. "How did you know where this place is?" she whispered through the darkness. "The Resistance dug hiding places like this during the Second Hyperspace War," he replied in a low voice. "XCOM fighters would hide in holes like this one whenever Advent got too close. Before the commander was rescued, the Resistance and XCOM had whole tunnel networks out here." Of course, Inez told herself. Now the Americans were using them against the UN. Meanwhile, Cassandra tugged on Jay's sleeve and asked him what time it was. He briefly powered up his smartphone and told her that it was just after 10 in the morning. "Okay," Cassandra whispered. "I need to take my medicine now." In the darkness, the young girl struggled with the bottle of mysterious red pills. After a moment, she did get the cap off and was about to remove one of the capsules from the bottle when a painfully loud noise forced its way into the cave. "What was that?" cried three voices at once. One of them belonged to Inez. The other two were UN soldiers right outside the cave. Jay's phone buzzed. He looked down to read the message and quickly turned the device off. "They're coming," he whispered. "They're coming to us." A moment later, one of the UN soldiers outside shouted to his comrade, "Contact left! 3 foot mobiles by that fallen tree!" "No, wait, 4! What the hell?" And then there was gunfire. Everybody inside the cave threw themselves to the muddy floor. Jay grabbed Cassandra by the back of the neck and forced her down. In the scuffle, Cassandra's medicine bottle spilled its contents into the mud, never to be seen again. As she dropped to the ground, Inez grabbed the front of Lawrence's shirt and fell, intentionally pulling him down in a way that guaranteed he landed on top of her. Outside, the sounds of combat were getting even more intense. Laser, plasma, and Gauss weapon fire snapped and cracked through the trees like a demented fireworks show. Someone yelled, "Grenade!" just before a loud crack rent the air, followed by the creaking and groaning of a falling tree. One of the UN soldiers barked into a radio, "This is Strike 1! Danger close! Enemy fighters are 20 meters away, requesting air support. Our position is just north of Miller Road by Schwartz Creek." "Negative, Strike 1, replied a tinny voice over the radio. All air support is already engaged. Additional ground support is en route to your position, but has encountered unexpected resistance. Over. The deep, thudding sounds of a railgun were punctuated with multiple falling trees. Understood, replied the UN soldier. Be advised, our position is in danger of being overrun. We've made contact with 4 Sierra Bravos and cannot hold this position. We're retreating to the east at this time. Over. Inez felt her heart racing at this development. Or perhaps that was Lawrence's heart beating so quickly. They were still lying together in the dirt, and a moment later, this turned out to be a good idea. There was a sudden burst of gunfire. Gauss rounds slammed into the hillside mere feet away from the blocked cave entrance. Everybody who was already lying on the ground covered their heads with their hands. Sarah and Jay both covered Cassandra with their whole bodies. Piper saw a target of opportunity. She stuck her weapon hand into the opening and fired a single burst from her laser pistol. There was a cry as somebody was struck. A moment later, it was all over. The gunfire stopped. Now, there were just the sounds of people walking around the forest floor. Inez was so nervous, she didn't realize she was holding her breath. A voice called into the cave from outside. You! In the cave! Tell me, why does God stay in heaven? Inez had no idea what kind of question that was supposed to be, but Piper clearly did, because she shouted back, Because he lives in fear of what he's created! Finally, the voice outside said, Area clear. Come on out of there. Piper pushed on the object blocking the cave entrance, and it fell away, flooding the place with light. Jay grabbed Inez and Cassandra by the shoulders and said, Listen to me. There are going to be some aliens out there. They're friendly. Understand? Aliens? Cassandra and Inez both cried out. Friendly, Jay emphasized. They're on our side. With a little reluctance, Inez and Cassandra followed the Wolverines out of the cave. The forest outside looked very different from when the Wolverines and their companions abandoned their vehicle. Nearly a dozen trees had fallen to the ground. Small fires marked the spot where plasma and laser weapons were used. A crater still smoldered some 10 feet away, and the bodies of 2 UN soldiers were sprawled in the ground, blood running downhill towards the creek. But these sights were nothing compared to the individuals waiting for them in the dappled morning sunlight. 1 human and 3 aliens, all armed to the teeth and wearing suits of power armor, were gathered in the clearing. Inez and Cassandra both hesitated. Neither of them had been this close to a non-human for a couple of years. I thought all of the aliens were expelled from Earth, Inez stammered. That guy on the TV said he made them all go away, Cassandra added. All 4 of the armored combatants looked past the Wolverines and stared at the 2 girls. Obviously, the first alien Inez looked at was the biggest one. A massive reptilian with thick scales and yellow eyes glared at her, snorting his disapproval from a massive snout. Inez guessed this giant weighed somewhere between 300 and 400 pounds. The power armor over top of his massive frame added to his already immense weight, and the armed reptile needed to constantly shift his footing so he didn't sink into the wet ground. The remaining 2 aliens were human-shaped, and Inez actually recognized their species. The first was an Ashurian man, but she assumed he had some Partogan blood as well, because his eyes were a vivid shade of purple. The Ashurian had big, bony ridges running along his forehead, up to the top of his skull, and down to the bridge of his nose, giving him a crinkled look. With a slight lurch of the stomach, Inez realized she found the Ashurian rather attractive. She wondered if she might have a thing for aliens. The creature next to him was a female, and she was very clearly a human-alien hybrid. Specifically, she was half human and half Levakian. She stood upright on two legs like Inez, but her entire body was covered in orange fur, had fluffy, pointed ears, yellow, cat-like eyes, long whiskers protruding from a snout-like nose, and a long tail. The human was just that, human. Yet, for some reason, Inez had the most trouble figuring out a member of her own species. This person, like her comrades, wore a suit of power armor that hid all of their bodily features from view except for their face. Yet, this person's face gave no indication whether its owner was a man or a woman. The person's medium-length, wavy hair would have been a good look on either a guy or a girl, and Inez had seen plenty of people with a face built like this one. A vaguely heart-shaped face with a strong chin, square cheekbones, and large eyes. Altogether, these four made up a very different group from the one Inez had been traveling with. The Wolverines greeted the newcomers as old friends, with handshakes and warm words. Piper actually hugged the Levakian hybrid, nuzzling her face in the Catwoman's fur. "Good to see you guys," Jay told the newcomers. "I was worried we were going to have to drive all the way up to Alpena to meet you." The human shook his head. "After we got your message," they pointed at Inez and Cassandra, "we figured we should meet you halfway. Uplink and Mockingbird found an abandoned airport and put the ship down. We'll meet them there." Inez groaned internally. This person's voice was also unisex. She really didn't want to barge into this conversation just to ask if this person was a dude or a chick. She'd just have to wait for a better time. "How?" Sarah asked. "We can't fit 10 people in our little truck, assuming we can get it out of the creek at all." The Ashurian shook his head. "Uplink got us a ride," he told the group. "Should be coming up the road soon." Inez tilted her head, listening to a sound in the distance. An electric vehicle was approaching. Jay heard it too. He pointed into the distance and laughed. That's not what I think it is it?" The noise grew louder until Inez finally saw something moving through the trees. It was a UN Army APC, nearly identical to the one that had chased her and Cassandra the other night. "Wait, what the hell?" Inez cried out. Two of the aliens, the giant reptile and the half-Levakian, started to laugh. "The UN Army uses the same over-the-air signal to communicate with all of their automated vehicles," the reptile said in a deep voice. "Uplink can hijack that signal to take over those APCs whenever he wants." "Not just APCs," the cat lady added. "Trucks, androids, starfighters, anything the UN lets a computer drive, we can take." "Wait a minute, those things are being driven by computer?" Inez asked. "Usually they are," Jay answered. "We should be careful, there might still be a gunner in the turret." The group was lucky. As the APC rolled to a stop next to the tree line, all of the hatches in the turret and backside opened up to reveal the vehicle was empty. Unfortunately, the APC was designed for humans to ride inside of it, and there was no space for the three aliens. They all decided to sit on top of the armored vehicle, riding just behind the turret. Jay said he would open the top hatch of the turret to talk to them. Once Cassandra was seated in the passenger area in the back, Inez clambered into the turret. Her curiosity was overwhelming at this point. The APC moved out, traveling a little slower than when it arrived due to the massive alien riding on its back. Jay, Inez, and the human of unknown gender all stood up in the turret hatches, the better to speak with the aliens riding on the back. The Ashurian and half-Levakian seemed to be enjoying the excursion, but the giant reptile looked like he was on the verge of misery. He was pressing his body against the cold metal, as though hoping to get some extra warmth from the engine. Inez wondered if the giant alien was cold-blooded. Jay started the conversation. Fortunately, no one had to raise their voices, the electric engine was nearly silent. "So, I think some introductions are in order," Jay said. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet the woman of the hour. She's the one who got this ball rolling after Cassandra landed in her lap. Inez Espinosa." All three of the aliens and their human companion opened their eyes wide and gave Inez a genuinely shocked expression. "Dude," said the Levakian woman. "No way," breathed the human. "Well, I'll be a Bracca's uncle," the Ashurian said. The human of unknown gender shook their head in bewilderment. "Please don't take this the wrong way, Inez," he said. Or was it she? Inez couldn't really tell. "But we already know you. In a way." "Let me guess," Inez interrupted. "It's got something to do with my parents." A sudden thought crossed her mind. "Hey, wait a minute," she added. "You don't know anything about what happened to my mom, do you?" This caught the human off guard. She, or he, stammered and tripped over his or her words. "Director Freeman of the ISO?" asked the Catwoman. "We've never met her, but we've been working against her for a couple of years now, I guess you could say. We're investigating her and some of her dealings. You see, we are..." But Jay cut her off. "Guys, Freeman's dead." Total silence, aside from the wind rushing past the group as the APC drove down the dirt lane. The human and his alien companions looked even more shocked and stunned than before. "At least, we think she's dead." Jay qualified his statement immediately. "The intel is secondhand. Inez heard it from her father." The Ashurian suddenly focused on Inez with new energy. "You've seen Professor Espinosa? Where?" he asked. "In Detroit," Inez replied. "He brought Cassandra to me. Wait a minute. Who are you guys? Seriously. How do you know me? Or my parents?" The human of indeterminate gender sighed. "My apologies," they said. "We were dancing around introducing ourselves because we weren't sure if you'd picked a side. But it looks like you're out of the loop, so here goes." The person sighed again and looked Inez squarely in the eyes. "My name is Varian Robinson. The hybrid is Quarter Ling. The Ashurian is Kingi, son of Araka. Our big Mycor friend is Setla Shunan. We're part of a group called the Stormbreakers." The words hung in the air. This was a lot for Inez to take in. She knew about the Stormbreakers. Everyone did. They were the great heroes who fought alongside Jericho during the War in Heaven. But that was almost 50 years ago, wasn't it? So why were these guys using the name? Were they a continuation of the original team? They could be. 50 years ago, a man named Robinson had led the Stormbreakers. He was still alive, too. Inez saw him on TV all the time. He was an old politician running for some important high office or something. And didn't he have a grandkid about Varian's age? A grandkid the tabloids made fun of for being androgynous? Inez's mouth fell open as the full realization of Varian's words hit her. She tried to speak, to say something in response, but no words came. What could she say? She was in the presence of the grandchild of one of humankind's greatest heroes, and Varian had clearly decided to assume Blake Robinson's role. Inez never got the chance to reply, as multiple voices cried out from inside the APC. "Stop the car!" Piper called out. "She's gonna be sick!" "Pull over!" Sarah added. "Pull over now!" The APC slowed down and pulled onto the side of the road. They had come upon the outskirts of a small town, abandoned for the past 70 years. On their left was the wreckage of what had once been an old-world courthouse. On the right, a rocky river snaked through the trees. The back door slammed open, and Cassandra ran away from the APC. She was as pale as death, her skin color tinged with shades of yellowish green. She ran behind a tree and emptied her stomach in 2 great heaves. Then she began to cry. "I lost my medicine," Cassandra sobbed. I think I'm gonna die."